people will now be able to hear what we're saying. All right, and I'm just letting people in.
Hello.
They're all coming in now. All right. And there may be some more people joining us as we go, but we can get started. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to our latest installment of Tenacious Live. This is actually the last of our talks in the February-March series, our wintertime series, because we are getting ready to get the boat in the water and start our season ourselves. But we want to thank all of you who've been in these meetings, those of you who have given presentations, and those of you who are joining us even for the first time tonight. We really appreciate it. It's been an amazing series of presentations so far. Our last speaker is going to be no exception. Marc Corbett is a diver and photographer. He is going to talk to us tonight about the shore wrecks of the Outer Banks, and I'm going to turn it over to him.
Well, hello. How's everybody doing? I'm Marc Corbett, and I've been diving off the North Carolina coast since 1991. Hang on, let me close some stuff. And I've been working on the dive boat Lion's Paw since 2010. I'm a wreck diver, wreck hunter, researcher, and underwater photographer. It's been my goal to dive and document every known wreck off the northern North Carolina coast, what we call the Outer Banks, and to identify as many previously unknown wrecks as I can. Tonight, I'm going to talk about some of the nearshore wrecks on the Outer Banks. I will be by no means covering all of them. There are too many for that, but I will try to touch on some of the more interesting ones. To date, I've dived on 23 beach wrecks. Tonight, I will cover 11. There are somewhere around 10 to 12 more nearshore wrecks than that we're actively trying to find and identify. These wrecks actually make quite a study in both history and in the area of steam engine development and technology. There are a lot of early steamship wrecks located near shore of the Outer Banks beaches. What we tend to dive offshore in North Carolina are usually the 20th century tanker and freighter wrecks. But near shore, you can dive 19th century Civil War era wrecks and some that are even earlier than that. I've always been fascinated with shipwreck wrecks in history. I was very involved in skateboarding and surfing in my younger years. And around 2008, my body started telling me I needed to do something with a little less physical impact. So I chose something safer like wreck diving. I started researching shipwrecks and following the directions available to finding them. I assumed all wreck divers were big history buffs and all the wrecks were probably identified. But I found out that wasn't the case. I realized that most of the convenient boat diving wrecks, like in recreational depths waters, were identified, but the shallow stuff and the deep stuff, many of these wrecks hadn't been found and identified. So in my crazy quest, I realized that the tough stuff was going to be in 20 feet and in 300 feet of water. So I started diving as many nearshore beach wrecks as I could, getting as much experience as I could, doing dive training, and I worked my way into getting a job as a mate on a couple of dive boats. And most important of all, I started researching shipwrecks and looking for them. I've probably put as much or more effort into research as I have into building dive skills. I work on the principle that if you don't do your homework on the research end, then your dive skills are irrelevant. I've been lucky to have met and worked with some really world-class boat captains and wreck hunters. I think Uwe Lovis put it best when he said, sometimes 5 minutes of research can be worth 5 days of searching. I'm lucky to live in a very interesting place, Wanchese, North Carolina, on the Outer Banks. And it was never in my intention to become a tech diver, you know, like I'm a tech diver. But I live in a place where we have the whole gamut of shipwrecks, as shallow as 3 feet and as deep as 400. And actually, there are plenty of them that are just too deep to dive here that they've found. So I knew if I wanted to dive all of the ones I could, well, I was going to have to become skilled at diving deep wrecks. That was going to have to become part of the game. The other thing that was going to have to become part of the game was underwater photography. So I could document all this stuff, because to me, it was like, it's not even worth doing if I can't see it later. So I bought my first camera for $150 and started learning. The place I started was the beach wrecks. It seems funny to me now. I figured that's what everybody did. Walked off the beach with a dive rig and a camera and just started learning. I didn't know about Bonaire. I never knew about liveaboards, where they assemble your gear for you. I just started diving wrecks and fixing my own problems and figuring out stuff. The thing is, when you dive beach wrecks, you have to solve all your own problems. You're the only one out there, you and your friend, whoever you're there with. You have to become adaptable to different kinds of conditions. So while it seems funny, this is also what you have to do diving deep wrecks. And I find shallower water wreck diving to be a little more like technical diving than it would be resort diving. So let's talk about northern North Carolina and what it makes it such a unique area. The area we call the Outer Banks sticks way out to sea. Cape Hatteras is 50 miles further east than Cape Lookout. The Gulf Stream comes closer to shore at Hatteras than anywhere in the mid-Atlantic. So the Outer Banks are actually adjacent to 3 different bodies of water. You've got up here the North Atlantic bight waters, down here the South Atlantic bight waters, and the Gulf Stream sort of forms a line and goes around everything, kind of following where it drops off into deep water. All these 3 bodies of water meet at Cape Hatteras, and specifically on Diamond Shoals off the point of Cape Hatteras. This area where the waters meet is known for severe storms, and even on a good day, it's hazardous to navigation. The Cape is also a natural obstacle for ships to go around, and it is adjacent to very deep water, so it's a perfect place for the German submarines to stop their play. And the result of all this is just hundreds of shipwrecks up and down the Outer Banks. There's a sea surface temperature chart. It becomes fairly easy to see the various bodies of water. The South Atlantic bight is south of Cape Hatteras down here, and you can see the green and yellow temperature ranges. Up here is the North Atlantic bight, which has the colder blue temperature ranges. And then you can plainly see the Gulf Stream going through and around the whole coast of North Carolina. Then this shot's from mid-July. This last shot was taken a couple days ago. This one's from mid-July. You can see the Gulf Stream has swirled in against the northern part of North Carolina up here. These conditions can result in some very warm water and some very clear water around the area known as the Outer Banks. Take a note of how close to deep water Hatteras here is, out to 600 feet here. But look how far it is from like Wilmington. You've got a long distance. We're really close to the Gulf Stream in northern North Carolina. The remains of hundreds of vessels line the shores of the Outer Banks. We'll look at some diveable nearshore shipwrecks now. These are by no means the only ones, but I'll try to hit on some of the more interesting vessels tonight. We will start from the north and work our way southward. The first vessel we're going to look at is the steamer Andrew Johnson, which is on the beach behind Pine Island in Corolla, North Carolina. It's the SS Andrew Johnson. She was previously the USS State of Georgia, and before that, the SS State of Georgia. She's a wooden-hulled sidewheel steamer built in 1851 at Vaughan and Lynn in Philadelphia. She ran aground October 5th, 1866 off Currituck Beach, North Carolina. Now, Vaughan and Lynn were a wooden shipbuilder in Kensington, Philadelphia. They were located on the property that later became Cramp Shipbuilding's Palmer Street Yard, which was just across the street from Neefy and Levy, which were another prominent builder in Philadelphia. The Andrew Johnson had formerly been the USS State of Georgia during the Civil War, and before that, the freighter SS State of Georgia. She was on the Philadelphia and Savannah steamship line. The vessel was one of many purchased by the Navy to blockade southern ports. Pictures from Eric Kyle's Early American Steamers, Volume 1. Up until 2014, the paddle wheel crankshaft right here stuck up out of the water. These days, the only thing that sticks out is this spike piece behind it. The paddle wheel crankshaft fell over in 2014. This picture's from the Outer Banks History Center. It was taken by NBC in the early 1970s. It clearly shows a side lever style steam cylinder to the south of the paddle wheel shaft, and that's right here. Note the crosshead up at the top and the levers going down to the side. The steam cylinder has arms on each side of it going down into the water. On just about every other style of paddle wheel steam engine, the steamer has the machinery above it. So that's how we know that this was a side lever engine. Here you can see what a side lever engine looks like. On the right is the steam cylinder, that's right here. In the middle is the jet condenser. Attached to that are these side levers, which are pushed by the steam cylinder. Unlike the walking beam engines that were common on American vessels at the time, the side lever kept a lot of the weight lower in the water, and it tended to make the vessels more stable. During the off season, you can drive on the beach in Corolla. That is the easiest way to get to the site. There's no public access to it other than a 2-mile walk or drive from the Corolla public access 2 miles north. So during the summer, when the water conditions are best, this kind of makes it difficult because you can't drive there. This is what was visible in 2012 when I dived it. You see here the paddle wheel shaft, and this is the crank arm. This was the remains of a steam cylinder over here to the south, and much of the wreck lay under the sand. Here you see the copper bearing inside the paddle wheel shaft crank arm, which used to stick out of the water. This is the paddle wheel shaft itself. It ran down at an angle into the sand and disappeared under the sand. This is the rounded steam cylinder to the south of the paddle wheel shaft. It measured about 6 feet across, which was what Lloyd's Registry, American Lloyd's Registry, gave as the dimensions of the steam cylinder on the state of Georgia. I believe this piece was probably the guide for the piston rod. It was lying on the ground next to the cylinder. The state of Georgia spent much of the war blockading Beaufort and Wilmington, North Carolina, mostly under Commander James F. Armstrong. It was involved in the capture of numerous blockade runners, including the Nassau, which had been a Confederate commerce raider. At the end of 1862, the state of Georgia, towing the ironclad USS Passaic, left Hampton Roads in convoy with the USS Rhode Island which was towing the USS Monitor. It was on this trip that the Monitor was lost off Cape Hatteras. The reason the Passaic did not suffer the same fate as the Monitor was probably that she started leaking water first, and the decision was made to turn around and head with the waves towards Nag's Head. After the storm cleared, the Passaic and the state of Georgia proceeded to Beaufort, where the state of Georgia relayed the information that the mighty Monitor was no more. On January 3rd, 1863, Rear Admiral S.P. Lee sent the following telegram to Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles. The state of Georgia reports that the Monitor foundered on Tuesday night south of Cape Hatteras with the loss of 2 officers and 28 men belonging to the Monitor or Rhode Island or both. The Passaic is at Beaufort. All reports received will be sent by mail today. So the state of Georgia was involved in the sinking of the Monitor, and I find it kind of cool that the Monitor and that ship are both located on the Outer Banks. The key to the identity of the Andrew Johnson was found in the Mariners Museum library in the photo files. It was listed under Andrew Johnson, and I recognize the name from the list I'd been compiling of the various steamships which had wrecked in the area. So when I pulled that file, this is what I saw. The photo was by John Lockhead, who was the head librarian at Mariners up until '76. It shows the wreck before the steam cylinder fell apart. And more importantly, on the back, it identifies the wreck as what Mr. Lockhead believed to be the state of Georgia and the Andrew Johnson. When I located this photo in the Mariners library, the librarian probably thought there was something wrong with me because I was just about jumping up and down, dancing around. I had built the house that lay in front of the wreck years before, and I had looked at this wreck every day for months. I later located in David Stick's correspondence files at the Outer Banks History Center conversations between David Stick and John Lockhead about what they thought the identity of the wreck was, being the Andrew Johnson. Every bit of research I later did on this wreck, I believe, backs up their theories that this is the Andrew Johnson. All the above and below water photography shows a single side lever engine and paddle wheel shaft. In the research I've done on shipwrecks in the area, I've only seen records of 2 ships with side lever engines that wrecked anywhere near this area. What is a bit unusual is that the state of Georgia was a US built vessel. There were not very many side lever engines built in the United States. The walking beam style engine was much more common. Side lever engines were most common on British built vessels, which is coincidentally, which brings up the second shipwreck I'm going to cover, the Ss Mountaineer. She was a wooden side wheel steam packet built in 1835 by the William Patterson shipyard, who later built the vessel Great Eastern, which was one of the first transatlantic steamers. She wrecked December 25th, 1852 in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Now, when I first dived this wreck, it was known as the Winx Wreck due to its location, which is close to the Winx grocery store on Eckner Street in Kitty Hawk. The wreck sits close to the beach, just to the south of Luke Street. Take note, this vessel was equipped with 2 side lever engines. Also note that the Mountaineer was built in 1835. This makes her second oldest steamship to wreck on the North Carolina coast. The only vessel older would be the Pocahontas, which was built in 1829, has yet to be located. And coincidentally, the steamer that they thought was the Pocahontas is actually the Richmond, and it's located in Salvo, North Carolina. Mountaineer is a year older than the recently found Pulaski, so this would make the 186-year-old Mountaineer the oldest diveable steamship on the North Carolina coast, and she sits in the surf right off of Kitty Hawk. Mountaineer would have likely looked a bit like this, but smaller. Note the vessel's a side wheel steamer, And like the Andrew Johnson and most early steamships, she was powered by both steam and sail. The key to identifying Mountaineer was found in notes in the Outer Banks History Center from David Stick's graveyard of the Atlantic Book. These are David Stick's hand-typed notes over the original newspaper from 1852, which I found in the Library of Virginia. Gives me, as a researcher, the utmost respect for the researchers who did what we do in the days before the internet and newspaper websites, and in this case, even before the photocopier. It says here from the American Beacon, Wednesday, December 29th, 1852, Marine News disaster. The British steamer Mountaineer of and from Liverpool for New Brunswick via Nassau, N.P. Stickney master, went ashore on the 25th, about 20 miles south of Currituck Inlet, and soon became a total wreck. All on board saved. She was an old steamer and had lately been purchased by a lumber company in New Brunswick as a tug and stockboat, and was 196 tons English measurement. Her machinery was detached and her smokestack before sailing, and the whole brig rig. She was 30 days out of Nassau. It was the intention of the captain to put into Hampton Roads or New York to have her machinery put in order, and then to proceed under steam to his port of destination. The crew arrived here yesterday. The captain and his wife will remain on the beach until the wreck is sold. Take note that it said the machinery was not working and it was detached, okay? From diving the wreck, I knew that there were a pair of these unusual steam engines sitting next to each other. Looking at the various lists of shipwrecks, I knew that only 2 steamers had gone aground in Kitty Hawk, the Mountaineer and a vessel called the Bladen. I found evidence that the Bladen's engine had been salvaged, so I knew that the Mountaineer was supposed to be an early British steamer. I also knew from doing research that the Mountaineer was the only early British steamer to have wrecked in the area. I then hit the internet to see what the engine of such a vessel looked like. If you've ever identified a ship, you're going to remember where you were and what you were doing. In this case, I was sitting in front of a desktop computer with a slow internet connection. I typed in early British steamer and this image came up. It about knocked me out of my seat because this was close to identical to the engines on the wreck site. This is the engine of the paddle steamer Levin in front of the Denny ship experiment tank in Dumbarton, Scotland. The steam cylinder is over to the right here. The single piston is moved up and down by steam and vacuum pressure, and it pushes this crosshead up top. The crosshead moves the lever on the side of the engine, and in turn spins the paddle wheel crank. This is my chicken scratchy drawing of the wreck site. It's not to scale. This is what archaeologists call a mud map. It's just a preliminary sketch. I'll leave the archaeology work to the archaeologist. If you are an archaeologist and you would like to work on some wrecks, get up with me. I have quite a few, and I would love to see that happen. From the north to the south, some of the items on the site are this large iron box up here, which I think may have been a coal bunker or a water tank. Pieces of what look like tubular boilers are just to the south of that. A pair of paddle wheel assemblies are on the site. And finally, we've got 2 side lever engines sitting next to each other. One of them has a crosshead on it, and the other one is missing its crosshead. This is one of Mountaineer's side levers. Sorry about the quality of the photo. That's one of the earliest photos I took. They've been buried under the sand for quite a few years, so I'm glad that I got this when I did. Here we see the remains of a steam pipe next to a jet condenser and a shiny copper fastener sticking out of the bottom here. When the wreck's exposed down to the remains of the wooden hull, there are copper fasteners that stick out all over the site. This is correct for what Lloyd's Register noted about the Mountaineer's construction: English oak with copper fasteners. All these things you've got to pay attention to. The top of the steam cylinder with the crosshead. Crossheads on some side lever engines were made of wood. It would appear this one's made of iron. Otherwise, it would have probably been eaten by shipworms. This is the steam cylinder closest to shore. It has its crosshead. The steam cylinder on the other side of the wreck does not have its crosshead. It's either been knocked off or perhaps it was detached. Now, remember in the newspaper article, it said that the machinery had been detached. Could there have been something wrong with this steam engine? Perhaps the piston rod had broken. The location of the paddle wheel assemblies give further evidence of the machinery being detached. The shoreside paddle shaft lies on its side with the crank facing upwards. That's not how you would find it if it was assembled on the wreck. The two pictures are stitched together here to show how that assembly lies on its side instead of being right side up. It sticks out of the sand and the inner hub is below the crank. This picture was taken by my friend Jim Bunch of the paddle wheel on the ocean side of the wreck. This paddle wheel assembly lies with the crankshaft facing out to sea. This would be the opposite of its correct orientation on the ship. The paddle wheel crank would have been in the middle of the ship. This lends further evidence to the theory that the machinery was detached at the time of the wreck. I think it would be highly likely they had taken the paddle wheels up onto the deck and gotten them out of the water to reduce drag. I find the missing crosshead and the unusual orientation of the paddle wheel assemblies evidence that, as per the article, the machinery shows evidence of being detached and inoperable. So when you're looking to establish a shipwreck's identity, things like this are very important. You need to consider that if the items on your wreck site don't match the historical narrative, then you might be barking up the wrong tree. Just because you want to think that a wreck is a certain vessel, that does not mean it is. You need to do your research. The proof's in the details. But I find the fact that this machinery is not where it should be on the wreck site a pretty good sign that this is the Mountaineer with the detached machinery. This is a crosshead on the air pump, which was part of the jet condenser. The jet condenser was an early form of condenser which used a jet of cold water to cool and condense the steam to be reused in the boiler. Jet condensers allowed a bit of salt water to mix in with the steam, and that caused the boilers to periodically have to be watered down to get the salinity level down. And it also is why early boilers wore out fairly early. Here's the large iron box that I think is probably a fresh water tank or a coal storage bunker. Another picture of a copper fastener sticking out of a piece of wooden hull. These are the insides of a boiler. Rounded end cap of a boiler right here. I found a British newspaper article from 1846 stating that the Mountaineer had been fitted with tubular boilers. So here we have a tubular boiler and another piece of evidence. Everything seems to match up to what the historical records tell us. Fire tubes inside of a boiler on the site. There are many kinds of boilers. The boiler shape and the boiler fuel may change, but the two things that are constant are whether it has a fire tube boiler or a water tube boiler. And of course, with a fire tube boiler, the heat is carried inside the tubes and the water is on the outside of it. With a water tube boiler, the water is on the inside of the tubes with the heat getting to it from outside. Mountaineer spent most of her life as a coastal steam packet operating around the British Isles. And she had actually sank off England at one point during the 1840s and was salvaged by divers in the 1840s. Something to note about shipwreck diving, especially on the Outer Banks. the sand moves around a lot. And this picture here of the crosshead was taken in 2020, just last summer. The picture over on the right was taken in 2016. And you'll notice there's about 5 feet more sand covering the wreck these days. And last summer, the water was only 8 feet deep there. I've dived Mountaineer when it was 20 feet deep and uncovered all the way to the hull. So you really got to dive these shipwrecks kind of often to get a good picture of what's going on around the sand moving around on these sites. So the Mountaineer was a very old shipwreck. The next vessel we look at is of a modern type, SS Carl Gerhardt. She was a screw steam freighter built in 1923 in Norway. She ran aground on the outer bar 1.5 miles north of Kill Devil Hills U.S. Coast Guard Station in September of 1929. So you see the Gerhardt's a more modern style vessel. She was a medium-sized Norwegian freighter carrying a load of gypsum. In a strange twist of fate, the Gerhardt came ashore and hit the wreck of the steamer Kazikis, which had wrecked in the same spot 2 years before. You know, what's the chance of that? In this aerial view, you can see the two steamers lying next to each other here, forming what is probably the best nearshore dive spot in North Carolina. It's called the Triangle Wrecks. The Gerhardt lies to the north, and the Kazikis lies to the south. The broken stern section of the Kazikis lies towards the north, furthest offshore. These wrecks are located just to the south of 2nd Street in Kill Devil Hills. Starboard side windlass of the Gerhardt. The rotating drum at the end could be for pulling ropes, and it's what is sometimes called a cat head or a gypsy. To the inside of this would be the wildcats, which were used for pulling chain. They all spin on the same axle. Spade fish on the Carl Gerhardt's hull. Sometimes the blue water comes in from the Gulf Stream on the shore wrecks, and it can just be incredibly clear. And a lot of people don't know this. Remember how I said the Outer Banks stick far out to sea? This sometimes happens that the blue water comes right in on the beach. I've walked out on the beach in Nag's Head, and it looked like you were somewhere in the Caribbean. Burrfish near the bow of the Gerhardt. This is the ship hull of the Gerhardt. Notice it's covered in mussels. Some of these northerly shore wrecks are covered in them. They're edible and they're really good. And they kind of cover everything up so that it's almost hard to tell what you're looking at. During the summer of 2019, there were a pair of sand tigers on the Triangle wrecks. So yes, we do see sharks on these wrecks. Gerhardt has a large pair of Scotch boilers. Nearshore wrecks are often home to herds of juvenile spade fish. Now, note on these spade fish, they've got the contrasting black and white stripes. They're the juvenile ones. These are larger spade fish on an offshore wreck. Notice how their stripes have kind of faded out. These are the older spade fish. Carl Gerhardt's triple expansion steam engine. Note the steam pipe coming out to the condenser on the right. Condensers use cold water from the ocean in a radiator type system to condense steam back into the water reused in the boilers. In the process, vacuum is produced. It increases the engine's power output. Steam pushes on one side of the piston while vacuum pulls on the other. In the low pressure earlier style steam engines, they actually made more of the power from the vacuum than they did the steam. Condensers also supply vacuum to other machinery aboard the vessels. Vessels such as the Gerhardt used a surface condenser, which kept more ocean water out and the steam separate as compared to a jet condenser, which we saw in the Mountaineer. Spadefish on the side of the Carl Gerhardt's triple expansion steam engine. a school of spot over the starboard side of the hull, cargo winch with cat head drum found at the stern. And at the very end of the wreck is the steering quadrant, which sticks out on the Carl Gerhardt. Now, about 50 feet from the Gerhardt is the remains of the other, probably more interesting steamer, the Kazickas. Previous names were the SS Paraguay. She was a steel-hulled, oil-fired screw steamer built in 1900 at American Shipbuilding in Lorain, Ohio. That's on the Great Lakes. She ran aground in Kill Devil Hills December 4th, 1927. Now, the vessel we know as the Kazickas actually spent most of its life as the Sun Oil Company's tanker Paraguay. While the vessel boasted numerous innovative features, it was involved in numerous maritime calamities, accidents, and strandings, and was plagued by mechanical breakdowns. So much so that you see up here, they were calling it the hoodoo ship at the time. The ship is famous for leaks above her boilers, which often put out the fires, leaving her stranded at sea. Sun Oil ran the ship for years, and in doing so, they said they learned what not to do with the tanker. She was eventually lengthened at the Craft Shipyard in Philadelphia, but was never a very big commercial success. After sitting for a number of years in Marcus Hook, New Jersey, the vessel was sold to a group of Greek investors who planned to use it as a coastal tanker in Europe. It never made it that far. On its voyage to Europe, it ran aground at Kill Devil Hills after losing fire in the boilers and taking on water in a storm at Kill Devil Hills. At the time, the wreck still had the Paraguay nameplate on its bow. The name Kazickas was on its stern, so it had just been converted and was going overseas, but never made it. Considering the ship's past history of breakdowns and malfunctions, a trip across the ocean and open Atlantic would have been pretty ill-advised. They were probably lucky that they wrecked in Kill Devil Hills. This is the anchor windlass on the bow of the Kazickas. Winches such as these were usually driven by small steam cylinders, and the auxiliary steam machinery and pipes that drive these things are all over the shipwrecks we dive. Steam was sent to all parts of the ship. The space between the two gears on the right is what's called a wildcat. That would pull the anchor chain. This is a picture of the Kazickas' anchor. Some tow bits. A ladder in the remains of the Kazickas' wheelhouse area. Once again, look here at the muscle growth on the side of the hull. There's a large school of spot inside the hull. And note the colors on the Kazickas' hull. You know, a lot of people don't think you get to see these kinds of colors on a nearshore wreck. They think it's all 3 inches of visibility and looks brown and murky. One of the innovative features on the Paraguay was the Babcock's and Wilcox alert style boilers. These highly efficient, high pressure boilers were originally coal burning, but their design allowed the Sun Oil Company to convert them to oil burning. You know, Sun was an oil company, so why would they want to buy coal? The newspaper article on the left details how Paraguay was one of the first ships converted from coal to oil burning. These kinds of boilers were in heavy use on ships in the U.S. Navy, and you can find them on battleships and cruisers and carriers. They were also on Liberty ships. Interestingly, the first Navy ship fitted with these boilers was the USS Alert, which was a sister ship to the USS Huron, which we will be talking about shortly. Note the steam drum up here at the top, and look at these fittings coming out of it. This is the steam drum on the wreck site. Note the fittings coming out. These were the steam outlets and safety valve nozzles that sent the power to the engines. On the other end of the tank is the water fitting, and this is where they sent water into the boiler. Now, here's a cutaway of the Backpocket Wilcox boiler. These are water tube boilers, unlike the earlier one we saw on the Mountaineer. The firebox is down here at the bottom. The water tubes are arranged like a radiator above it up here. Then they feed into the steam tank once the steam is made, where it is sent back out to the boilers. Notice the horizontal tubes that go into the tank here. Here's a look at them on the wreck site. You can see the tank and the tubes here. The outside has rusted away, but all the inside parts and the boiler, the steam tubes still remain intact. Paraguay was unusual in that she had a quadruple expansion steam engine. You can count the cylinders. You got high pressure, intermediate, and low pressure. Quadruple expansion engines are not very common. As far the triple expansion engine is much more common. The largest cylinder is the low pressure cylinder. As the steam weakens and loses pressure on its path through the engine, the pistons get larger so that steam has more surface area to push against as it gets weaker. Each piston stroke pushes roughly the same amount of torque onto the crankshaft based on the size of the cylinders. Here's some spot over the remains of the surface condenser. Notice on this surface condenser that the heavy marine growth is on the iron parts of the tank, all through here, lots of mussels growing on it. But the growth is not very high on the copper pipes inside because, you know, copper discourages marine growth. And you can see that on this piece of copper near the condenser here. The last thing at the end of the wreck is the steering quadrant at the stern. This is a classic half moon shaped steering quadrant. Gear drove the steering quadrant somewhere around in here, and it would push it from side to side. The quadrant's attached on top of the steering rudder post, and the rudder is, of course, attached to that post, but it's now buried under the quadrant in the sand. The next wreck we're going to look at a little further south is the Schooner Irma. She was a three-masted wooden schooner built in 1917 by Clooney Construction and Towing in Louisiana. She ran aground in 1925, 1 mile north of the U.S. Coast Guard station at Kill Devil Hills. Here's a picture of the Irma right after she ran aground. Wooden wrecks are less common for us as divers than the iron steamships. And the reason for this is that the wooden vessels are often buried in the sand. They get eaten by shipworms and break up and get washed up on the beach. Schooner Irma is at times uncovered. And while it's really close to shore, sometimes you can dive it on a high tide day when it's real calm. This was believed to be the bow of the Irma. It's washed down the beach and has been seen in numerous places. It comes out of the sand every once in a while and washes somewhere else. This was in 2012. Note the anchor hawser for the chain is still attached in this picture. This is the rest of the bow. It is behind the Croatan Surf Club in Kill Devil Hills. The condos replaced the classic hotel Croatan Inn, which was also Papagayo's and Quagmire's restaurants back in the day. This is the bow. Here you see wooden hulls sticking out of the sand. Notice all the green growth on the shipwreck. It's rare to find an intact diveable wooden sailing shipwreck. They do exist, and this is one of the best examples, and it's right in the middle of Kill Devil Hills. The wreck's often covered in crabs. Note that the wreck's not covered in mussels like the triangle wrecks, which are made of iron and steel. This is the rudder post at the stern. You can see the gudgeons. This day I shot the picture. It was more uncovered than I've ever seen it before. And here's an up close look at one of the gudgeons. The next wreck we're going to look is the SS Volunteer. She's an iron-hulled screw steamer built in 1868 by Rennie, Son and Archbold in Chester, Pennsylvania. She ran aground February 23rd, 1873 in Nags Head, North Carolina. The wreck I believe to be the steamer Volunteer lies just to the south of Atlantic Street public beach access in Kill Devil Hills, right over the Nags Head line. In 2016, we found a very small part of a ship in this location. Even though we found very little, sometimes this can be enough to identify the wreck if you find something that would be specific to the ship in question in the correct location. Maybe what they call the smoking gun here. This is the largest piece we found on the wreck site. The picture was taken from above. I would say that it is about 15 feet across this way and about 10 feet across this way. I was completely stumped as to what this item was. I showed the pictures to Dr. Nathan Richards of the ECU Maritime Archaeology program. He was working at the Coastal Studies Institute near my house at the time. Nathan suggested it looked like the boilers on the steamer Oriental. So knowing that the archaeology work had already been done on Oriental, I quickly retrieved that information. He was correct. Take a good look at the shape here. This is what Oriental's boilers looks like. And it's almost a dead match. Look at the shape here. The Oriental was built at Neefy and Levy in Philadelphia. Rennie, Son and Archbold built the Volunteer just down the Delaware River at Chester. Thomas Rennie had originally been partners with Neefy and Levy. So Rennie was the boiler maker. So by having a similar boiler on this site, we've got the correct style boiler that a Thomas Rennie built steamer would have had. Take note of the funnel shape here on the ash boxes. Here's what it looks like on the wreck site. Notice it's lying on its side, but you've got that funnel shaped ash box here. The location of the wreck was given in the Wilmington Morning Star of February 28, 1873. The location is, in fact, 12 nautical miles north of Body Island Light, which is where the newspaper here said it would be. The New York Times of March 5th reports the ship's demise. The wreck of the steamer Volunteer, before reported ashore on Kitty Hawk Beach, went to pieces on Saturday morning during a heavy gale. A portion of the hull lies bottom upwards. The cargo of the steamer Volunteer lies on the beach awaiting shipment to Wilmington. And you'll note here we've got the fire boxes pointing north and the boilers lying on its side. It's fairly unusual for a shore wreck to get turned on its side. They usually are remaining in the position they ran aground, usually right side up. The fact that this boiler is lying on its side fits the description of the wreck being turned over. So the location is correct, the machinery is correct, and the machinery shows evidence of the vessel being turned over. So while it's not quite like finding the name of the vessel written on the side of the ship, I think this is pretty good evidence that this is the remains of the steamer Volunteer. Hang on a second. To the north of the boiler, the remains of some steam machinery protrude from the sand, probably part of a steam engine. It looks similar to lever-powered auxiliary equipment on the Oriental, which you see here over on the right. Now, interestingly, the next wreck we're going to look at was built in the same shipyard as the Volunteer in Chester, Pennsylvania, after the shipyard was purchased by John Roach. This is the USS Huron, probably the most famous nearshore wreck on the Outer Banks. Huron was an Alert class iron-hulled single-screw third-rate gunboat. She was built in 1874 at John Roach Delaware River Iron Shipbuilding and Engine Works in Chester, Pennsylvania. She ran aground November 24th, 1877, approximately 3 miles north of Nags Head U.S. Life Saving Service Station. The Huron stranded in bad weather, resulting in great loss of life. 98 crewmen, including the captain, perished on the wreck. A further 4 wrecking crewmen of the Baker Salvage Company were killed while trying to salvage the wreck, along with the district superintendent of the U.S. Life Saving Service. Public outcry over the Huron and Metropolis tragedies resulted in the establishment of more U.S. Life Saving Service stations and a move to staff them more months of the year. The nearby Nags Head station was not being manned at the time of the incident. And at the time, the stations were only manned between December 1st and April 30th. The wreck lies just to the north of Bladen Street, a few blocks north of Nags Head Pier. There's a pagoda with information on the Huron at the beach access, and it's a pretty easy swim out to the wreck. This is the bow of the Huron. Note the blue water up top here, but 10 feet below it's a silt storm. These are some of the conditions you can encounter on nearshore shipwrecks. Sometimes you can come back 4 hours later and it's just totally different. If you're trying to dive these wrecks, I recommend trying to plan your dives so that you get there at high tide, as the most offshore water has been pushed in, and sometimes it'll be clearer at high tide. This is a picture taken from the sand looking up at the Huron on a better day. The strange thing on this day was the water was actually pretty cold, probably about 60 degrees. I think this day might have been a result of deep water upwelling from offshore, but it pushed in some very clear cold water. One of 5 cylindrical boilers on the wreck. This one is forward of the others on the starboard side, close to the bow. My friend Joe Friday, who researched and wrote the report that led to the Huron being declared a historic site, tells me this boiler was most likely dislodged by salvage operations. Looking down through the Spade Fish at the same boiler, and the boiler tubes are gone out of that boiler, just leaving the tank. The hull of the Huron stands fairly tall in places. Juvenile black sea bass are very plentiful on the Huron. You see a few here. Spots swimming over the hull. One of the intact boilers further aft on the port side of the Huron. You can see it still has its end, unlike the one on the bow end. The Huron is very close-spaced ribs, and it was actually quite overbuilt. Prop shaft leading away from where the engine should be. The engine was salvaged at some point. Interestingly, I've never been able to find who salvaged the engine. We don't know if it was salvaged by Baker or the Navy or another party. And if anybody ever comes across information on who salvaged the engine, I would like to know. I would like to know where it ended up. Did it end up powering another vessel? The engines were compound and they were horizontal, unlike the kinds of steam engines you see on a lot of the freighters we dive and tankers we dive. Sort of like a VW engine. And the reason they were horizontal was so that they could keep the engine below the waterline to protect it from shell fire, because the Huron was a Navy ship. This is the port side stern and rudder post. Here's the rudder. The rudder post is now home to the fish. And these are the kinds of fish you see in Nags Head. This was taken on that same day. You can see the silt storm down below and the clear water up top. On the starboard side of the hull of a large size section of the deck has been blown off by salvaging. Baker Salvage blew the deck off on December 8th, and looking at some black sea bass underneath that section of deck. It must have been a powerful explosion. This was the stern deck hatch. It lies on the sand on the stern side of the wreck. I don't know why I didn't pull the hat out of it before I took the picture. But the Huron can be an amazing shipwreck to dive on the right day. There's a picture of my daughter on a nice summer day when we went out and snorkeled on it. She was 11 when I took this picture. Sometimes it's like that on the Outer Banks, just clear and blue and calm. The next shipwreck we're going to look at is the SS Explorer. She's a wooden-hulled single-screw steam tug built in 1918 by the Southland Steamship Company of Savannah, Georgia. She stranded on December 12, 1919 in Nags Head, North Carolina, after breaking loose from a tow in rough seas. The Coast Guard wreck from the report for the loss of the Explorer. There's a large collection of life-saving service and Coast Guard wreck reports at the Outer Banks History Center, which I'm lucky to live near. The staff has been immensely helpful in my wreck research. These are the general arrangements of the Explorer and her sister ships. They were given to me by my friend Greg Stratton. He's an archaeologist. If you look at it, Explorer was like your classic tugboat. She was almost brand new when she ran aground. She was less than a year old, hadn't even made a voyage on her own. This is one of my earliest photos of a large fluke anchor on the bow of the Explorer. This area has been covered by sand for many, many years. Boiler of the Explorer, about half buried in sand. Here you're looking at the port side of the wreck. Note the wooden hull over here next to the boiler and all the spots swimming around the wreck. Sometimes these shore wrecks are just absolutely covered in fish. Triple expansion steam engine of the Explorer, which once powered it. You can see the 3 cylinders. Here's the low pressure, intermediate, and high pressure. This is a double expansion steam engine here on the wreck of the Hesperides on Diamond Shoals. To compare to it, you see 2 cylinders, whereas the Explorer and a number of other ships are 3 cylinders. Explorer steam engine from the side. Note the crankshaft and rods are buried in the sand. From the angle at which the engine sits, I'm fairly sure the engine is collapsed into the sand somewhat. It does not stand very high off the bottom like some of these engines do. And it was a wooden hulled vessel, so I'm thinking the wood may have broken down and the engine sort of fallen through it. Here's the high pressure side of the steam engine. This is the pipe that sucked the spent steam into the condenser. And this is the remains of the surface condenser. The metal tank was once encased. This has rusted away, and the ends of the tank still remain. You can see the copper pipes that carried the salt water used to cool the steam into and out of the condenser. This was a sealed system, and when it was operating properly, it didn't allow the salt water to mix with the steam so that the steam could be sent back to the boilers. Burrfish are plentiful on the wrecks north of Oregon Inlet. There's a large tow bit, another tow bit. These are the tools that make a tugboat a tugboat. Part of a steam winch, also a very important tool on a tugboat. Double tow bits. These would have been on side and used to tie the vessel up to docks. Remains of a tank, either for fuel or water. The next wreck we're going to look at is located on the other side of Oregon Inlet, getting further south. It's on Pea Island, the northern part of Hatteras Island, and it's a wreck I believe to be SS Sheridan. previous names were the USS Stetton and the SS Stetton. She was an iron-hulled schooner-rigged screw steamer launched in 1861 in Sunderland, England. She ran aground September 24th in 1866 off Body Island, North Carolina. Note the Body Island no longer exists. It's actually cut in half when Oregon Inlet formed. So the Body Island was actually on both sides of Oregon Inlet. The southern part is known as Pea Island. The Sheridan began her life as the Stetton, a fairly small British steamer. She was not terribly fast. Her maximum speed was around 7 knots. She was captured by the USS Bienville, attempting to run the blockade off Charleston, South Carolina. She was seized as a prize of war and sold to the U.S. Navy. She then spent most of the Civil War as a U.S. Navy blockade ship off the South Carolina coast. In this image, we see the Stetton capturing the blockade runner Aries off Bowles Bay, South Carolina on March 28, 1863. The ship appears to be schooner rigged in this picture, and the vessel shown in very little detail. This drawing of the Stetton here was in pursuit of the blockade runner Havelock. Havelock was run aground and burned June 10th, 1863. Stetton was involved in the capture of blockade runners Diamond and St. John's. So she actually was a pretty successful blockade ship. Note that in this image, Stetton's shown with a brig rig. After the Civil War, the Stetton was sold to the William F. Weld Company of Boston. She ran aground on September 24th, 1866. According to newspaper sources, she was carrying close to $1 million worth of cargo. Both sketches from the Civil War show fairly little detail. So what do I think Stetton looked like? Don't laugh at my drawing, but this is what I think she looked like around the time she ran aground. Her initial Lloyd's registry stated that she was brig rigged. In her sole appearance in the American Lloyd's Registry in 1866, she was reported to be schooner rigged. The crew and the passengers all made it safely to shore after the stranding. What happened next is when she was boarded and salvaged by the notorious wreckers of the Outer Banks. The plunder of her cargo was made famous in the New York Times, where the Outer Banks wreckers were even called land pirates. In the only case I've ever seen of the federal government prosecuting wreckers, a large number of Outer Banks residents were arrested. Most of them got off with a slap on the wrist, but over $100,000 worth of cargo was seized by the federal government from residences on Roanoke Island, which is where I live. In federal court documents, I discovered that one of the wreckers prosecuted did not have an Outer Banks family name. His name was Isaac Walling, and Walling, I found out, was a diver. In fact, he was a diver for Baker Salvage when they raised the USS Merrimack off the Norfolk Naval Yard to be converted into the infamous ironclad CSS Virginia. Walling bought a schooner around the time of the Sheridan salvage. So it appears as though he came into a bunch of money at that point in time. So did he find something valuable on this wreck of the Sheridan? You tell me. Wreck of Sheridan lies off of what is called Pea Island. It was found by Uwe Lovis, but Uwe never dived it. With the numbers he provided me, Reese Newman and I became the first divers we know of to dive the wreck. Of the suspected vessels I knew that had met their fates here, I most suspected it to be the Sheridan. The location was correct, according to the newspaper articles, and what we found on the site confirmed what we thought. This is what it looked like on the site. On the right here are U.S. Navy records, and notice the Stetton was powered by 2 inverted steam engines with a cylinder diameter of 3 feet. This is what is on the site. We've got 2 steam engines with a 3-foot diameter. Also on the site are 2 small cylindrical boilers, also listed in the Navy records. The boilers are not in the proper location. One of them is sitting between the steam engines, and one of them is on its side in front of them. They're not supposed to be in this location. This is not how boilers are located on a ship. We think this is a sign of salvage. The smoking gun to me is that the two cylinders are not compounded. They're the same size. They're two steam cylinders using steam only once, not recycling it like a compound steam engine. Really, they're two separate steam engines on the same shaft. This is not terribly common to find. This is not a very efficient design. It wastes a lot of steam. Most two-cylinder steam engines are of the more efficient compound engine. Remember, the Stetton was very slow. This engine is the engine of a very slow vessel. The right cylinder with a plate over the pipes going into the cylinder from the steam chest out to a condenser. This is the left cylinder. It's sort of hard to tell, but from the size of the sheep's head here, you can tell it's about 3 feet in diameter. Valve on the right cylinder. And here's the boiler lying on its side in a strange location between the engines. I don't think this is a correct location. Another boiler closer to the correct location, but it actually lies on its end. So was this salvage? And looking back towards the steam chest and condenser area, you'll note the spongy yellow coral that becomes more common as you proceed south on the Outer Banks. And at the end of it, we found these objects. I'm not quite sure what they are. Uwe told me that when they first found the wreck, they saw that the sonar image said there was more hull exposed than we saw it. So I'm thinking that we need to go back and look at this wreck again too. The next vessel I'm going to cover is the steamer Oriental. She is an iron hull screw steamer built in 1861 at Nefi and Levy in Philadelphia. And she ran aground May 16, 1862. Steamer Oriental was only 10 months old when it ran aground. She was carrying U.S. Army troops and munitions to Port Royal, South Carolina. The Oriental is called the boiler wreck and is a familiar sight to boats heading south from Oregon Inlet, and even to cars on the highway, as the wreck sticks out of the water and is easily visible. It's located on Pea Island, just across from the visitor center. The part that sticks out of the water is not really the boiler, but the steam cylinder of a large inverted steam engine. The wreck is pretty far off the beach, and I recommend, if you are trying to shore dive it, using a kayak. The top of the Oriental steam cylinder as it appears today. What's showing on the steam cylinder is the top of a guide rod and housing. I've seen it stated that this was a tandem high pressure cylinder, but this wasn't the case. If it were, there would be steam lines and machinery going into that cylinder up top. On the right of it over here is the steam chest, which controlled entry and exit of steam out of the cylinder. This is the steam cylinder on a different day at low tide. And you'll notice where it sits in the water at the present. Here's a picture of it from the 1980s. My friend Lou Ostendorf, who is probably the biggest expert there is on the steamer Oriental, gave me this picture. It shows the engine is now sinking slowly into the sand. On the left, you can see lever-driven auxiliary machinery at the base, and on the right are the steam pipes that go down to the boiler and condenser. The boiler and condenser pipes are underwater these days. The steam engine is actually about 30 feet tall and stands on a large 3-leg tower. You can see the legs here. Spade Fish inside the engine room, the engine's legs. Further down the legs. And this is the crosshead lever driven auxiliary machinery that comes off of the side of the engine. look a little closer here, there's lots of red biogrowth on these wrecks south of Oregon Inlet. If you go offshore south of Oregon Inlet, the wrecks out there have this kind of red look to them also. You're not seeing the mussel growth like we were seeing up off of Kill Devil Hills. This is the flywheel, kind of a murky picture, but this flywheel was used to keep the engine running smoothly. It was a single cylinder engine, so when the steam cylinder would reach the top and would reach the bottom, it would kind of not be pushing. So the flywheel was used to keep spinning so that it wasn't a jerky operation. This is a very early picture I took of the two blades of the propeller, one of my first pictures underwater. This is too. This is the capstan. About 100 feet from the wreck is the bow section. And this is the jagged edge of the Oriental's bow. Now, the last vessel I'm going to cover is the steamer Strathclyde. She lies off of Rodanthe Pier. She was an iron-hulled screw steamer built in 1876 in Middlesbrough, UK by R. Dixon. She ran aground March 24th, 1891, 1¼ miles south of Chickamaucomico Life-Saving Station. The Strathclyde lies to the northeast of Rodanthe Pier, and she's a pretty big shipwreck. It's a long swim out to the Strathclyde also. I recommend using a kayak if you want to dive the wreck from shore. The wrecks off of Hatteras Island seem to be further out than the wrecks off the northern Outer Banks. And I think that's because we are losing a lot of sand from the island over the years. And if you go through Rodanthe, there's houses that have gone in the water that when I first started coming to the Outer Banks, a whole nother block was on that side of the street. And now the houses are gone almost all the way up to the street. So the shore wrecks on the southern part of the Outer Banks are generally in deeper, further out water than the ones on the north end of the Outer Banks. The boiler of the Strathclyde. Now, note the spongy coral growth. It's yellow and very spongy, is more common on the wrecks to the south. Notice these wrecks are not covered in mussel growth like you see in Kill Devil Hills. Looking inside the boiler, note these white coral heads of hard coral and all the yellow spongy coral that's inside. Once again, something you see more to the south. Here's a picture of a wreck on Diamond Shoals, and you notice by the time you get that far south, the wrecks are almost completely covered in these big hard coral heads and the yellow coral you'll see on the wrecks. This is the area where the North Atlantic bitewaters meet South Atlantic bitewaters, and the wrecks on Diamond Shoals are most covered in coral of any wrecks I've seen in the Outer Banks. You go further south, you see different kinds of growth on the wrecks. You go further north, you see different kinds. And at Diamond Shoals is where I see the most hard coral growth. The Strathclyde's other boiler is completely mangled and ripped off of the wreck on the starboard side out in the sand. You can see the fire tubes here are just splayed out in different directions. Steam engine is knocked over and is just a tumbled, jumbled mess. And it's covered in this yellow and white coral. These are the ribs of the hull. Strathclyde's broken up and spread around, and the ribs are spaced real close together. This is an iron-hulled wreck. The iron hull construction has stood up to corrosion better than some of the steel wrecks that we dive. Steel's a stronger material, but cast iron is actually more corrosion resistant. Strathclyde was carrying iron ore, and you can see it splayed out all over the bottom, all around the wreck. Here's the remains of a fresh water tank. The prop shaft of the Stratherly. She was a center engine vessel, so the prop shaft runs a really long way down the wreck. Here's a Spade Fish on the prop shaft again. And there's piles of anchor chain up on the bow of the wreck. And that's pretty much it for the Stratherly. And that's pretty much what I've got for you tonight. Hope you found some of this interesting. And does anyone have any questions?
Mark, we do have some questions coming in both in the chat and from people who are watching on Facebook.
Okay.
So the first question I'm going to ask the first question because it's from my dad, and I feel like I have to ask my dad's questions first.
Okay.
And he wants to know why so many ships ran aground on the Outer Banks. Is it the weather, the ocean, the current, poor seamanship? Is it poorly marked? Why is this an area that so many ships have run aground?
Actually, everything you just said is the reason why and more. Like I was saying earlier, we have 3 bodies of water, and sometimes that South Atlantic bight water will be like 70, 80 degrees. The Gulf Stream's going to always be 70 something degrees. And that North Atlantic bight water can be in the 40s, sometimes even into the 30s. So these waters hit and they make fog. Then you throw in the fact that we've got diamond shoals at the end of Cape Hatteras going out something like 15 miles, and it'll be shallow. It'll be 20 feet deep, 15 miles out on diamond shoals. Ships ran into that and they were terrified of it. So they would make guesses about navigation, trying to avoid diamond shoals. And if you hadn't seen the sun or the stars for days and you were navigating off a sextant, diamond shoals must have been the most terrifying place on Earth. And there are more vessels up on diamond shoals than you can even count. And all the beaches around it are just littered with ships that ran aground in bad weather or because of malfunctions. They were the perfect spot for the German subs to sit and stalk prey because it was very close to deep water near the diamond shoals, and the ships had to go around it. So the Germans could hide in the deep water during the day, come up, go into the shallow water, and wait for ships to go by at night and pretty much take their pick. So there's a lot of reasons. And also, we just have bad storms here. One of the things that people complain about diving around here is we get blown out a lot. And to me, the answer is just, yeah, well, that's why we've got all these shipwrecks, you know?
So another question coming from our good friend Karen Flynn. Yeah, get ready. She wants to know, do you have any wreck sites that you've dived and are still unable to identify? And what wreck are you most interested in finding that is still eluding you?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes. As a matter of fact, I have 4 different wreck sites that I believe may be part of the same thing, but my theory on it is far from proven, and I would like to explore those sites more. And I need to get back to the National Archives and do some Navy research with this theory. Probably the ship I want to find the most, it's the Merlot. That's the last of the big tankers that's missing in diveable waters that hasn't been found yet. And I'm actually working on that. I've been working on that for years. That's not really a nearshore wreck. That's sort of halfway out to sea.
And some people are asking just about the kind of the exact depth. We have a question on Facebook about the last 2, what the depth were, and then kind of generally for all of these wrecks, what the depths are.
Can you? Okay, generally, the northerly, the ones on the north side of Oregon Inlet tend to be in about 15 to 20 feet of water. And when they're very uncovered, they'll be 20 feet. When the sand has piled up on them, like last summer, we went to the wreck of the Mountaineer and it was only 8 feet deep. And just the very top of the steam engine was sticking out of the sand. Now, as you go down south off of Hatteras Island, those wrecks like the Oriental and the Strathairley and the one I think to be the Volunteer, they can be as deep as 30 feet. And they'll also be like a half-mile offshore. You need to take a kayak or a rubber boat out to them if you're going to dive them from shore.
And one comment coming in from Joanne, who I guess is new to your area, and she was really excited to have this information. So I thought that was kind of cool. So welcome. And another comment coming in from Facebook or question is it common for the region to have shipwrecks pile up on each other like the triangle wreck that you mentioned? Like, is that a common thing or not so much?
Well, I think that it has happened more than once. There's a piece of wreck on the Strathairley site that I do not think looks like an 1890s steamer. I think it's highly likely there's two wrecks there. The triangle wrecks are two wrecks. When they found the U-576 out off of Hatteras, it's very close to the wreck of the Bluefields, which was one of the ships that sank. So sometimes I think they do end up piling up on each other.
And John wants to know if there's a good book that describes the wreck and the location. Is somebody putting a book together? Are you putting a book together?
Yes, I've been working on a book for 11 years.
I know that feeling.
I've written 27 chapters now. I mean, the text is there. It's not because I'm being lazy. It's because I've got five steamers I want to find before I put it out there. And one of these days, I'm just going to have to give it up and write the book in the state it's at. But this summer, I'm hoping to find some more. The ones I'm specifically searching for are up near Kerala, and there's a few in Nags Head, and there's one or two on the south side of Oregon Inlet that I'd like to find also. We found another schooner wreck year before last, but I haven't really explored it enough yet to say what I think it is, but we need to go back to that one also.
And I'm gonna give your friend Joe Friday here the last question. I heard you mention him earlier. He wants to know about the mussels. He said from his experience in the 80s, he saw the mussels that you mentioned kind of died off at the end of the summer that would reveal more structural detail.
Yes.
And he wants to know you've seen that too.
Yes, I have noticed that the mussels tend to die off towards the end of the summer. And towards the end of the summer, some of the wrecks off of the northern half are really quite devoid of anything after the mussels disappear.
Well, I think that was our last question. I'm just checking. Yep, that was the last question on Facebook too. Thank you so much. Tons of things coming into the chat. Thanking you for an amazing presentation, as well as on Facebook. And for anybody who didn't get to see the rest of it or came in late or wants to share with friends, this will live on our Facebook page and you're welcome to take a look at it there. As for us, I want to thank you, Mark. This was amazing. We really appreciate you being here and doing this. Also want to encourage folks to go to our Facebook page. If you haven't liked our Facebook page, like us, follow us. We also have our new website, which is dvtenacious.com, that talks about the projects that we're doing. And we really appreciate, again, everybody being here for our seminar series. We do, although our seminar series is officially over today, we are going to be doing one more presentation. And I'm going to put it up online. We're really excited about it. It's going to be on April 18th. And it's going to be Owen McGarry from, he's an Irish wreck diver who has dived the Lusitania more than any person alive. And he is going to give a presentation about the Lusitania on April 18th. And that is also going to be a fundraiser for the new Lusitania Museum. So we're not charging people to attend. If you want to watch, you can, but we will be encouraging you to donate to a GoFundMe to support this new museum that is really just going to be spectacular. So that, and we're going to be giving away some great prizes for people who donate and stuff. So we're going to kind of make it a big go to try to raise some money for the Lusitania Museum. So that's going to be on April 18th, and we'll post the details a little bit either later today or first thing tomorrow morning. So hope you'll join us for that. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great
Thanks for
night.
coming.
Thank you, Mark.
Appreciate it.
Well done. Good to see you.
You
Yeah,
too.
guys.
All right.
And as
Thank
soon
you.
as we get open back up, we need to go get a drink somewhere.
Bye,
Take care.
everybody.